What should be on Utah's agenda this offseason? We'll talk about that on today's Locked On NHL in Utah.
You are Locked On NHL in Utah, your daily podcast on all things hockey in Utah, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Locked On NHL in Utah, your number one daily podcast on all things hockey in Utah. The NHL in Utah, the new NHL team in Utah. I'm your host, Robyn Leano, and as you can tell, I'm not alone on today's episode. We finally got another voice coming in here. Tom Callahan joining us. Tom, you've been around the block quite a bit and covering the NHL. Let's introduce yourself as you're going to be going to be around for a while on this show now.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. First of all, thank you so much for having me on as part of it. But for those of you who don't know, my name is Tom Callahan. I'm a former NHL play-by-play guy with the Nashville Predators. Did several years with them and then transferred over to ESPN Radio in Nashville. Did some sports talk there for a while. And I have quite the roadmap, and my suitcase has a lot of stamps on it, including Tucson, which is where Robyn and I first met. So I was working for the Roadrunners, went down there to start that AHL franchise, then ended up working for the University of Arizona as well. So just a lot of experience. I've been around this formerly Coyotes, now Utah franchise. Spent a couple of years there with their top affiliate in the American Hockey League. So have a pretty good basis on that team as well, and looking forward to talking about this move to Utah.
We're really glad to have you, Tom. And I just want to put a little anecdote for everyone to kind of get an understanding of how Tom and I knew each other. Like you said, we met in when you were in Tucson. I think the funniest thing was I was a little bit nervous to talk to you at first. I was still a student, and I was like, "Oh, he's a former NHL voice or doing," and my then mentor, I'd refer to him as Tim Gasson, actually finally put the introduction to him. It's like, and you know what, guys, Utah fans, you know what he tells Tom out of anything? He's like, yeah, I tried to hire Robyn, but she didn't cut it out for me. I was a sophomore year. I was freaking dumb. I was dumb then. I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, that's great first impression.
That's okay. We all got to start somewhere, but mental note, okay. No. I mean, look, I understand completely. We all started somewhere. No one just is born into knowing the game, no matter what people might think. We have to grow into it. So you've done a great job.
And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you being a part of this show. And like I said,
oh my goodness, my allergies. I apologize. I'm going to sneeze like 12 times during the show. I'm so sorry.
Happens.
Yes,
but
I'm so sorry.
No, when you first reached out to me on the interest in being a part of the show, I was like, to get the opportunity to work with Tom Callahan again, it's something that I couldn't take up.
Well, and when I saw that you were doing the Utah show and formerly again the Coyote show, I still had a tiny sympathetic bone for these guys, and just watching them and playing in a college arena and just the way everything was going and the change of ownership groups and just kind of just following the saga. It was a saga, right? It was drama. Yeah. It was the reality TV of the NHL. And so I still have, guys on that club and within that front office that I would consider friends. And, especially it was hard reaching out the last game in Arizona and talking to my friends in that organization and saying, man, I'm thinking of you tonight. And it's tough. And I've been in touch with them, a little bit since, and nobody knows anything yet. And they're still trying to figure it all out. So fingers crossed people land on their feet, but at the end of the day, it's a business. And
it is.
This is what we're seeing. And hopefully the business will be better in Utah and eventually down the road, Phoenix, if it gets its arena deal, if it gets its land, they should get a team back. Gary Bettman loves Phoenix. I think they'll go back.
I think we've talked about that multiple times. I'm not sure how much time I talked about it with you, but on the previous shows or previous iterations of any podcast we've done, is as long as Gary Bettman is commissioner, hockey is going to be have some kind of presence in Arizona. Like, it's not going to go away.
Yeah, it will. It will. And I mean, they haven't said as much yet. I think Phoenix is going to house the Roadrunners this year, and I don't know anything that anyone else doesn't know. However, I also know how to read between the lines, and from being in the organization and just knowing how much Phoenix hated Tucson, the building, and all the negative things. It was kind of an interesting behind the scenes thing. We definitely do not have to go into it, but we always could down the road.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was gonna say, I mean, even more deeper, just not just how much Phoenix hates Tucson, but even the latter, as well as just
I mean, the organization was trying to get out of Tucson, and now they had a chance. The American Hockey League, actually, Scott Howson had a chance on XM home ice to say, yes, they'll be in Tucson this year. He was asked directly and said, well, we'll have hockey in Arizona. So guess what? I think they're going to be playing in Mullet. So
there's still a lot of hurdles for that to happen as the now top affiliate of this Utah franchise. Where exactly they play, it's still mostly unknown, as like you said. But you said it's most of the lines have been drawn, and we kind of connect the dots.
Maruello didn't sell the team, and he spent $26 million on an annex to Mullet Arena. He has no ties and nothing keeping him in Tucson. So are you going to let a $26 million building that you built for your team, your organization that you now no longer own, to sit empty and just give it back to the university? I know that was a plan someday, but I think kind of secretly the plan had always been someday that was never going to ASU. It was going to have an AHL team in it once the Coyotes got a new barn. So guess what? I just think that part of the plan has come to fruition. Maruello didn't sell the team. He still owns the Roadrunners. I fully believe they'll be in Mullet this year. And the Roadrunners stopped taking deposits on tickets. So I don't see any other place they'd be.
And I'm sure from your perspective as the former voice of in Tucson, you spending so many times here, like you probably got your own personal, like a lot of feelings about how all this is going down, which is a whole nother issue.
I do, and I still own a house in Tucson. I love Tucson. I think Tucson's a great city, and it'd be a shame for them to lose their team over this. But University of Arizona is building its own new rink, and hopefully when that opens and is shiny and new and beautiful, I hope the people who are the hockey fans of Tucson, if the Roadrunners happen to not be there, I hope they go support that program as well. So I know it's
not just them, but the women's program as well.
Right, and I know it's not perfect. I know it's not everything everybody wants, but it's hard, man. It really it's so hard to think of in a town where they have a little bit of a stigma of losing their pro teams if they lose another one. That hurts. But like I say, I've got a house there. I love the place, so I think it's fantastic. I hope it works out well for them.
Yeah, we really do. I think like both you and I can both say that. But we got a little bit of a more to talk to, because we got to talk about what's coming up for Utah. There's a huge offseason ahead of them. Lots of different moves they can make. What's considered the perfect offseason for Utah? What should be on Bill Armstrong's agenda? We'll get to that right after this. And today's episode is brought to you by Policygenius. Policygenius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net starting today. With Policygenius, you can find life insurance policies that just start at $292 per day for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. All you got to do is talk to a team of award-winning agents who walk you through the process step by step and easily compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Policygenius gives you unbiased advice from licensed expert support team. They have no incentive to recommend one insurer over another, so you could trust their guidance. With thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot from customers who found their best fit to fit their needs. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policygenius. Head to policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/LockedOnNHL. Let's keep things rolling on today's episode of Locked On NHL in Utah. Once again, Robyn Leano and Tom Callahan. I want to give you guys a heads up that coming up later this week, we will be talking with Howdy Kalakesh of Dobber Prospects and Locked On NHL Prospects. We'll be taking a look at the 2024 NHL draft class. Who's coming up? Who should Utah target? We'll talk about that on later this week on Locked On NHL in Utah. But let's talk about this. Other than the draft, obviously the draft is a huge part, Tom, of this upcoming offseason. It is a huge offseason for Utah, in which they really have a blank slate this year.
They do. It's funny. I was just kind of looking over their cap situation and looking at really a lot of, shall we say, question marks. But when you say blank slate, so for instance, no defenseman right now. I mean, looking into next year, yes, you're going to have defensemen. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, we're going to play with, 18 forwards dressed every night. No. But they have a couple of RFAs in Dursey, Moser, and Valimaki. Josh Brown is a UFA, but maybe you see him coming back. But the question here, and you look at Bill Armstrong as a GM and what he has tended to do over the years. Armstrong is not a super reactionary guy. He's got a plan. He tries to stick to his method and build the way he sees fit. Plus, let's face it, I don't think it's going to be a spectacular free agent signing the summer. I mean, there's kind of like there is most years, there's one or two big fish out there. But I really am a firm believer in that you build through the draft and maybe you make a couple of trades. But now in the cap NHL, it is all about what you get out of your RFAs. And if you're able to extend them at reasonable prices, you hope you get that production during their RFA years. Because if you do, then that's your core. Once all of those RFA kids grow up, and they hit their second, sometimes third contract, that's where the money is. You don't keep them all at that point. So really, it's important to get production out of the early 20-somethings while you have them under team control, and that's what Utah needs to do.
They really do, and I think that you could take a look at, like you mentioned, those RFA names and just on just defense. I'm trying to look what they just have. I mean, they just have one on offense, on forwards, and Barrett Hayton. Who's I think also are all of the defense ones are, but arbitration eligible, which we got to talk about too, because I feel like I'm not sure what you feel like that could play a role. I've had so many people ask me about what that could look like, especially where there's a lot of these players didn't know that they were going to play in Utah this season. They weren't going to be a play a team for Utah. They wanted to be with. They signed because they wanted to be in Arizona, and now they're free. Does that play a factor when it gets to deciding, hey, let's just go to arbitration so we can see if we can get to somebody else, or let's see if we can just trade away our rights or whatever it might be?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there are only so many teams and there are only so many jobs. I am sure there are players who want to sign the retirement contracts and just fish in Florida, or who want to be as close as Disneyland as possible for their kids and play in Anaheim. You'll get those couple of players who take those deals, but I think players want to win. They want to be in places where they have a shot at winning a cup, and there are far less desirable markets in both the U.S. and Canada, I think, than Salt Lake. You're going to be going into a new place with a chance to build a new program identity. Now, you're not building a new team, but you are building a new identity in a new community. To some guys, that's exciting. You get to be the first sweater that somebody ever buys. And, it'll say Utah on the front and Jimmy Smith on the back. And maybe that appeals to Jimmy Smith, but not everybody is going to be big on that. And so, I mean, you look at the Coyotes, what they've got right now. Liam O'Brien, by the way, is the only unrestricted free agent this summer, but they have a nice core of forwards, right? But then you've got guys coming up on decision years a year later. Kerfoot's one of them. Bukestad's another one. Jack McBain, but he'll be an RFA. So at this point, I think this is a prove-it year because I think this core did well, not well enough to make the playoffs, obviously, but I think they started to build together. I think that they formed an identity, but if they really do not build a good defensive core, you're going to lose, I think, a lot of these forwards heading into not this season, but the following 25-26 season,
Yes.
because that basis is not there for them. So it is very important, and the pressure is on the general manager, Armstrong, to make sure that there's a solid defensive core in place.
And I think, I think there was a decent amount of hope going around that. I think, especially where you can potentially re-sign the young guys. Bill Armstrong has, previously shown a decent job at doing that. Plus, I want to reiterate this. Something I mentioned earlier is Andre Tourné, the head coach, was brought in to essentially appease the young guys. He knows how the young kids work, and I think that is what's worked for him with his years in Arizona. And I sure as hope that stays the case, and I'm pretty sure it will stay the case for this first year in Utah, because nothing's changed. It's still him. It's just a different city.
Right. And that's something I think, and even I'm guilty of forgetting, but I think people are guilty of forgetting, is that, again, this is not expansion. This is a already built franchise, prospects in the pipeline. This is not the first draft. They're coming in. They are a bona fide NHL team to start with. So, number one, that's good for the market. But again, I look at Tourné as a coach who I think, you're right, young guys want to play for, and it is different now. You talk to coaches at any level, there is a difference in the 20-something player now. They want to be coached differently. They want to be talked to differently. They want to be approached differently. And I think that's why we see a lot of the old school coaches not working in the new school game. Mike Babcock is probably one of the biggest one.
Yes.
The mind games are out. You cannot do that anymore. Now people actually, well, not that they didn't care about their mental health before, but now it's not as much of a suck it up and get through it attitude as we used to have, especially in the world of sports, which, is highlighted all the more by Connor Ingram's Bill Masterton trophy win. So that's where we are now. And I think that when you have a coach who understands that, and you have a general manager who hires a coach who understands that, I think it really will help you build a successful young hockey team. And that's one of the big keys to me.
It really is. And I think that should give a lot of Utah fans hope, right? It should give that this first year should be a very promising one. It really should. And it's hard, again, it is hard to tell because we don't know. There's still a lot of unknown factors, and we can break some of those down. Something that could be the possibilities. Draft, whether it's draft profiles coming up this offseason, or free agency targets, trade targets. There's a lot we can break down. Obviously, today is just a little bit of more just getting that blueprint, but there are so many different avenues we can explore this summer.
And the most important question that I have for you, Robyn, does Shea Weber become the first Hockey Hall of Famer wearing a Utah jersey?
That would be who? Wouldn't that be something?
Wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be something? He's the only guy left on the OEL, still on the dead cap space. And the buyouts for Cassian and Nemeth, but for a while it was, or Nemeth rather, for a while it was just, the joke, everybody retires a Coyote, and as a matter of fact, I remember seeing a guy who had a Datsuk Coyotes jersey. And remember, he finished his career technically as a Coyote. So yeah, Shea Weber just still sitting over there. But it's interesting. So, and I bring that up to kind of poke fun at it, but to also say the Coyotes have cap space. And in this cap constricted world, that's huge. Not everybody has that. I know the cap's going up a little bit this year, and it's going to keep going up. but cap space is just as important when it comes to being able to move and acquire players and to be able to get things for them, including stocking up on draft picks. If you pinball a guy through your organization and hang on to 500,000 on your cap, I mean, that, or $1 million or $2 million. I mean, it's not like the Utah team doesn't have that space. That is in play when you are working with other teams. And so, that can help to offload some guys who might still be good players, just not worth what they're getting paid. And a lot of these, just because the AAV is what it is, here's something else to explain to fans. The AAV can be 7 million, but the way the cash is structured, if the guy got all his money up front and the last 2-3 years of the contract are $500,000 cash, you're laughing. You're like, okay, great. We're paying this guy, well, not next to nothing, but NHL next to nothing.
Right.
All we're doing is suffering the cap hit. And I think that's, those front-loaded contracts work out that way. What matters is the average annual value, and that's what it hits against your cap. So you can actually make your team better by helping another team remove a player who's expensive on the cap, but not expensive on the pocketbook.
Which is what Arizona did notoriously for the last couple of years, and it worked for them. I think they essentially got paid to pick up Shane Gostisbehere a couple of years ago, and there are other players who just weren't worth it compared to considering to these teams. And Arizona was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. It's the same. We could see the same case here for Utah, or who knows? Thinking ahead, but what is the possibility that they make a big splash in free agency? That is a thing that some people have asked. We'll talk about that right after this. And today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle, level it up to peak performance, superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP, bring home huge wins, keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Let's keep things rolling on today's episode of Locked On NHL in Utah. Robyn Leano and Tom Callahan. We're talking about the blueprint for this upcoming season, off-season for Utah, and a lot of things they can do. We talked about the cap space right before that break, Tom, and how they have so much of it. They can do whatever they do so much with it. You mentioned that they did, in the effort of acquiring assets, is taking on those, quote, bad contracts of players who are currently still playing. They still might be overvalued on the AAV, but like you said, essentially pay them next to nothing on the actual cash value. But they also have the ability to make a big free agency signing if they really wanted to. I think someone brought this up to me, Tom, and I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's the chance is like almost 0%. But it was.
I can't wait now.
It was a thought that came to my head. Like, Steven Stamkos is a UFA this season. What's stopping Utah from making and that's what someone put out to me. I'm like, I don't know if I want to do that yet because you're rushing a rebuild at that point. But man. I mean, and that's just one name. But there's other potential names out there. Someone who you could potentially sign for, who are potential free agents.
So let me say this first and foremost: Utah does not have to sell tickets. Not in year one, probably not in year two. So there's no need to So let's look at the last two expansion teams, just because those are your new market teams.
Yes.
Vegas got it absolutely right by having Marc-Andre Fleury as the face of the franchise, sold tickets, did it the right way as far as building the hype. Vegas was ready for a team anyway. They were going to explode. And so they had the right guy. Selling tickets was not a problem for Vegas. Seattle comes in, different approach, no name coach, no name players. Didn't really, I mean, they didn't have a face of the franchise guy. They overpaid a goalie in Grubauer, who came off a really solid, incredible defensive team in Colorado. It was never going to be able to replicate those numbers, and they overpaid him. But so as I'm thinking to myself, man, who's the face of the Seattle Kraken? I still don't have an answer to that. And they struggled to sell tickets in year two. Now, not that they struggled, they just didn't sell out, which you would hope for an expansion team. You ride the wave 3, 4, 5 years, then you're going to start to have those problems. But there were games not selling out in year two. So that is a little bit of an alarm. And they did it a different way. Now they fired their coach. They're looking for a new answer, a new direction. They built the team pretty generically. They did not reach for any big names out there at all. So I thought that was an interesting way to go about it. But so two different approaches is what I'm getting at here. Now, for the Utah team, you have a pre-made roster coming in, but to the Utah fans, know nobody really on this team. So whoever you can bring in who might be a big splash could be your face of the franchise. Now, Stamkos, I don't think is going anywhere. I think Tampa Bay has to sew him up. Otherwise, Tampa would burn. And I just don't see it. Unless something happens behind the scenes, which can happen, where things get acrimonious, I can't see him going anywhere else. But as I take a look at the list of names out there of guys who could come in, free agent, and maybe be that guy, you want to talk about defenseman. An aging Alec Martinez has a Stanley Cup pedigree, but he comes from Vegas, so he's a guy who would right away lend interest to the Vegas Utah rivalry, which will be there. And just a couple other guys, I'm looking for the big name, a Jonathan Marchessault who might or might not fit into the plans of the Vegas Golden Knights beyond this season. But Vladimir Tarasenko, Florida would be silly to let him go, but if he does go, that's a big one. Elias Lindholm of Vancouver, that's another really big name. Could put up some points there for them. So, there's guys out there, and just, I'm scanning down this list here, seeing who's out there. It's funny you mentioned Gostisbehere is out there too. He's a free agent set to come up with Detroit here. There's names out there of guys who could be a player who could come in and kind of be that person who picks up the ball and runs with it. But for the most part, I don't think, in my whole long-winded speech is all about saying, I don't think they have to make that signing because they don't have to sell tickets. You don't need the splash.
No.
And Robyn, as I look at what's out there, you know who my splash guy would be outside of Tarasenko, honestly, would be Jake Gensel. If they could get Gensel, that to me is a splash guy. But again, up front, they're pretty well set. Yeah. Defensively, I'm sure they're going to be able to build a core, no problem. But a lot of the defensemen that are out there are aging. This is a Coyotes team that is going to be. They're going to be a good team. They're going to be a team that's in it every night. And they're going to play in front of a sold out fan base every single night. And I think these guys are in a great position to not have to worry about having the pressure of making that home run signing.
Yeah. And let's remember, and I want, and I'm glad you mentioned all that as a piece of it, because the fact that they don't need it also stems from, you take a look at some of the players that they do have, that that coming on over from Arizona, Clayton Keller has only been getting better in the last couple of years. Logan Cooley is a potential future superstar. Like, if you are going to be like a huge hockey fan coming in, like, and you are a Utah fan, like, you have every reason to be excited for this core coming in.
Sure. I like, and it's funny, I like Logan Cooley a lot. He's on his entry level deal. Bargain at $950, right? That's kind of the expensive guy here is Keller, 7.15 on the cap hit. And then really, I mean, Schmaltz, who I like when he's healthy. And Lawson Krause is another guy at 4. He's 4.3. And those are your top 3 guys. That's not a lot of money in your forwards. So you do, again, you have the room, you have the cap room, you have the ability to make perhaps a trade or get something done where you could retain some salary, pick up some more younger players, get some depth. Although I think by year 2 in Utah, there will be pressure on this team to make the playoffs. I don't think it'll be there next year. I think it'll be the second season in Utah, again, that 25-26 season. But that's where the wheels could come off if you don't retain that core. So that's why this year is so important.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why there has been that focus on, like, can they make a splash signing, which as we just said, it's not necessary, but you could make at least a quote splash move, so to speak, kind of like to at least kind of boost yourself going into next year. And again, that goes with finding core defensemen you can focus on, because they got nothing.
You want to hear my stir the pot name?
Let's hear it.
Mitch Marner.
That'd be interesting.
Bad year in Toronto. Not worth his contract right now, but I think is worth his contract. And something's got to give. I think Tavares is what's going to give for Toronto. But if they're looking to move on from Mitch Marner, there aren't a whole lot of teams that could afford to take Marner. And Marner would be a huge impact in Utah.
I'll say this right now, as that is a huge pot stir, mainly not necessarily for the Toronto.
I like the
fans,
smile on your face when you thought about that.
But I mean, because you think about it also of the effect that would put that the potential effect, and I feel bad on this case, but the eventual effect for the Arizona fans, because they were kind of falling in the shadow about that, because Mitch Marner being around the same year where Dylan Strome came in, and Dylan Strome made nothing out of the Coyotes organization, barely made it out of Tucson, which you and I got a chance to watch his years in Tucson. We loved him in Tucson, just never got past, and which was a whole different ordeal. But the fact that the Marner name could probably sprinkle some salt on the wounds of Arizona right now, which again I feel bad for, but would be a very interesting move, and I think could potentially work based off exactly what you were talking about.
Well, and I'm sorry, Arizona fans, I really am, and for those of you who are going to root for this Utah team, I mean, because you're following the boys or whatever reason, yes. I mean, God bless you for being here, and you can still be on this train with us. But let me tell you something. There was a guy who got traded because a franchise moved, and he would not have gone to that franchise had they not moved, and they wouldn't have won 2 Stanley Cups. And that guy is Patrick Waugh, because there was no way, if the Nordiques don't become the Avalanche, if they stay the Nordiques, Patrick Waugh does not get traded from Montreal to Quebec City. It does not happen. It just doesn't.
You're right.
So no matter how good that Nordique franchise was, they never end up with Patrick Waugh. But in Colorado, not only were they out of the province, they were out of the conference. So they ship them out. They ship them to the Avs in the Norderlands, as I like to call them. End up winning a couple of Stanley Cups with good old St. Patrick. So just a thought. But yeah, Mitch Marner would look good in whatever Utah ends up wearing this year.
Yeah, we've talked about the colors, potential colors. I want to see some kind of color in there going into year 1, even if it's just generic Utah.
There's not enough green I think there's got to be green, right? You got the Minnesota Wild and the Dallas Stars. Those are your green franchises, man. Let's get some more green.
I mean, I was thinking something that came off. It's like, hey, you can even play off what the Utah Jazz have been doing and keep that and go to purple because there's no purple. There's really is no purple.
The Kings have very
Anymore.
much downplayed
They
used to have purple
be.
jerseys.
They used to be, yeah, they used to be, and it's no longer a huge part of it. It's like in the crown on their logo, but that's about it, maybe.
Right. And even if you go back to the old ones, which were called Forum Blue, by the way, same thing with the Lakers. It's Forum Blue. It's not purple. I mean, even back then, like that was kind of the signature colors of the LA sports teams, except the Dodgers. But you looked at those two and you thought, man, you knew those colors were right away and they were distinctive. You know what I mean? So it's interesting. Some teams you can say a color scheme and people know the team you're talking about. Like if I say silver and black, you know who that is. That's the Raiders.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing. And and in hockey, if you say blue and white, well, now you got two choices, but people I think would normally assume the Leafs, but you got the Lightning have also simplified all the way down to blue and white. They dropped the black. And Dallas, like I say, is black and green. And then the Minnesota Wild are red, green, a little bit of that gold color. They have an interesting scheme with the black, but I think that Utah has room for it. But they could also do, what there also is lacking right now is baby blue. They could do baby blue.
That was another color I had in mind. I was like, baby blue would actually look probably solid. I think it's parted in their temporary logo right now. Just that Utah, it's got like a very slight baby blue or like frost blue trim. It looks
okay. Frost blue. I like that color. So now let's do that with a little bit of gold in it. Okay. A little frost blue and gold.
I love that.
Yeah. So then you can go black and white in behind it. And yeah, you could build a really nice, but I hope it's a signature color base. I hope it's not black and red. You know what I mean? Everybody's black and red. That's not hard to replicate or something like that.
Here is the interesting thing. I mentioned the purple. The Jazz colors is purple and baby blue. So that could work.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and you know who I give them all the credit in the world? Vegas and Seattle both hit home runs with 100%. Their jerseys, their colors, their look, their scheme. Both of them crushed it. So the pressure's on the Utah franchise to do the same. And by the way, if they're not called the Yeti, I will be crushed.
Great. It was one of my top 4, but I've got other names also thinking. But
Yeti, it's got to be the Yeti or Yetis. That's interesting. Is Yetis? What's the plural? Could you get away with one Yeti, multiple Yeti? I'm gonna have to look that up.
I say we'll keep it without the S for now. I think it sounds better.
Okay.
Anyways, Tom, you're going to be on, hopefully sticking around this show for quite a while. We're going to have you as a huge part of the new branding here on Locked On NHL in Utah. So where can everyone find you on social media and elsewhere?
So if you want to check me out at Callahan on Air over on Twitter. I actually have not been very active the last couple of hockey seasons on Twitter, but dusting it off a little bit here now and trying to get back in gear. And really, I mean, that's the place you can find me most often right now. I used to have a podcast of my own with another former NHL voice, Mike Haynes of the Avalanche, Talking Puck. We're kind of on pause with that one right now, but so I mean this is another reason why I'm excited for the Locked On show here for Utah NHL, because now Robyn, you and I get to talk some hockey and it gives me an outlet for things in and around the league. So if you want to reach out to me on Twitter, that's great. You can see the handle right there on the screen, and I look forward to talking to folks about it, no matter what it may be, if it's expansion, if it's playoffs, whatever you want to talk about. I love talking about it. So
yep, and for everything here on Locked On NHL in Utah, that's on the app formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, which we'll still call Twitter. As much that
everybody's going to call it.
Everyone's still calling it Twitter. It's at LO_NHL Utah. I am at Robyn_Leano. It's Robyn with the Y_LEANO. Interact with any of us, ask a question, send us a DM. We'll answer right back or in a future episode of the Locked On NHL in Utah podcast. If you like what you heard, also don't just leave a subscription, comment, We love all the interactions. We'll like I said, we'll interact back. We will. We love it. We love talking with all our fans, as I have so far with all you guys in the first week. We'll keep doing that. Keep the spirit alive as we keep things going for Locked On NHL in Utah. Once again, thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. We'll see you guys next time.